G'day everyone. What we have here is a D40 Navara rear axle. Now we're taking this out so we can replace the seal and the bearing if we need to as well. So the bearing is here. You can see it is a cone bearing and it has a cup still in the axle. This one has ABS, so we have an ABS sensor, and it looks like this on the vehicle here. We have this backing plate here for the drum brake. Now that can actually stay with the axle. If we leave the brake cylinder on and the handbrake, we can take the axle out and leave the backing plate on. That is probably the best bet. To get it off, we need to take these 4 nuts here. There's 4 nuts and washers. We undo them and we can slide the whole axle assembly out to make sure we're ready to catch any oil coming off that axle. This is the backing plate here. We can see the handbrake will go through here and the wheel cylinder goes there. If we can leave that on the axle, that is for the best. For me, this is already apart. We have an ABS sensor. Take that out before we remove the seal or we may damage it, and they're quite expensive. I'm going to remove this backing plate here and we can see we have a floating flange here with these 4 studs. It's quite thin. I was going to press on it, but it is very thin and I figured it's best not to press against that. Instead, we'll pull it apart one by one and we may need to cut these bearings off. Now here we have the assembly. We can see we have the bearing, the collar, and the ABS ring there. We need to pop that ABS ring off. It is just pressed onto the shaft. It's not very tight, but it is quite delicate. I've tried here to pop it off with a couple of crow's foot bars to no avail. I wasn't quite strong enough, so I've decided here to use a half moon puller with a couple of bolts and nuts. And you can see here, we can just jack it off and it comes off quite easily. You could probably get behind it with a punch. Just be very careful. It's very soft, and if you damage any of it, it will give you a sense of fault, and that is not what we want. Now, once we pop that off, we can just lift the whole assembly off, and there is a circlip hiding underneath. That circlip will retain this collar. So we'll pop that circlip off, and then this collar underneath needs to come off. Now, mine was very tight. I'm not sure if they are able to be pressed off quite easily, but this one here was exceptionally tight. I put quite a lot of force behind it with the same half moon puller we used to take the ABS ring off. And it was very, very tight. It didn't move at all. I hit it with a hammer when it was under force. And we also tried to heat it up with a blowtorch. It's not a very hot flame here, but a little bit of heat on either side. Usually something like this would pop off. So it didn't. So we made the decision to cut that collar off. If you're going to cut it off, which is fine, just make sure that the bearing kit you've got comes with a new one. A lot of new bearing kits will come with a replacement collar, so cutting it off isn't a problem, but just be sure to make sure that you've got one in your kit. I cut a notch in it like this, and then I'm going to go ahead and grind that notch out with something a little bit more delicate than the grinder. We do not want to nick the shaft in any way. The journal behind this collar is for the seal. It will leak if you nick it, and of course we don't want to damage any part of the journal underneath this collar either. Once we've got it very thin, we can crack it with a chisel. Once we hit it with a chisel and it starts to turn like this as here, we can see it's now turning on the journal. We know it's now loose because we've actually cracked it. I never ground all the way through it. I ground it till it was thin, and then I cracked it with a chisel. Now the same goes for the bearing. The bearing cone here, we'll cut the cage off, get rid of that cage out of the way, drop all the rollers out of the way so we can get to the inner race, and then we need to cut the inner race. Behind here is a ring. I'm not sure if you get that ring in your kit as well. Definitely make sure you check that. I cut the ring. I'm not too concerned with this particular unit, but if you need to reuse that ring and you don't get it in the kit, make sure you do not cut that ring that sits behind the seal here. Once we've exposed that inner race, it's probably better if you have a grinding disc to actually grind a flat spot on either the collar or the inner race and crack it with a chisel. That's not what I did. I hit it square on, but I think you might have much less chance of cutting into the shaft if you grind a flat spot onto the inner race or even the collar and then crack it with a chisel. It takes a bit longer, it makes a bit more mess, but you're much less likely to nick the shaft than the method I'm using here. I just managed to crack it again. You can see the cut I made, and the shaft is still very happy and we did not damage it in any way. But like I said, maybe grinding a flat spot would be a safer bet. When it comes to replacing the cup inside the axle housing, you see here the cup is actually quite loose. But if it's a little bit tight, you can use a crow's foot bar like this to pop it out. It was very loose, very floating. I think that's how it's meant to be, so I just pulled it out by hand. Now, when it comes to the seal inside the axle, there is a seal sitting inside the axle housing, and that will seal any oil from leaking past that bearing. So we have a spacer here, that is the orange part. We need to pull the spacer out. They're not tight, but they can be locked in with a bit of oil. So what I've done here, it's got a bit of suction with oil. I've got a single leg off a puller, and I'm going to stick a bar through it, and we're going to pry that spacer out. You can do this anyway. You can use an Allen key or anything like that, or a hooky bar or a seal pick. You just need to be able to pull that spacer out. With the spacer out, we can just put that aside. A lot of seal kits will come with a new spacer, but if it doesn't, just put it aside for reuse. And of course, behind there, we can see the seal. It's a seal encapsulated in a thin piece of steel. It's not very tight. I just used another crow's foot bar here, and I just kind of slide hammered it out. It wasn't tight. You work your way around and you can just slowly basically tap it out from the inside. You don't need a lot of force. If you can use a puller or something like that to get under it, that's even better. But this worked perfectly fine. Just tap, tap, tap all the way around, and slowly it will walk its way out of this axle housing. If you've got a Tek screw or something, you can screw into it, or you can pry off. There's also different ways we can get in there, but this worked perfectly fine. I'll give the housing a bit of a clean up inside and out, and we'll buff this face here, make sure everything's really tidy, make sure there's no burrs or anything from them crow's foot bars, and then it is ready to be put back together. As you can see here, the seal will seal on the journal of the axle, and the spacer keeps it away from that ABS ring. Now, I used an 1 7/8 inch socket here. It's a pretty good size. Any sort of spacer that's the right size for that seal is the way to go. You can see we have the solid part of the seal facing out and the lip facing in, and that gives us something nice to purchase on when we're knocking it in. You don't need to hit it hard. We just need to tap it in until it's against the shoulder inside that axle housing. I use a small extension here, and we'll just tap it with a small hammer, nothing crazy. We just want to tap that home. And of course the spacer goes in behind it there with the lip facing that direction, basically, so it helps guide that axle in. And of course we also have the new cup to go in. Now that's a little bit tight, mainly because it's not very square. A small soft hammer is perfect for this. Just tap it in. If yours are really tight, you can freeze them and drop them in, but for the most part they shouldn't be very tight. Mine certainly weren't on either side of the axle. So tap, tap, get it square, and then yes, it falls in quite easily. Now looking back on the axle here, we can see the assembly. We need to make sure that flange is clean, and we put it back on the axle. After that, we have the seal, and then we can see we have that ring, the steel ring. Make sure you reuse it if you need to, or use a new one. Of course, and then we have the cone bearing. We can heat them up to about 120 degrees C, and they should slide on to the shaft okay. If we need to put them on with a pole or a post or something like that, you can get a bit of pole or post that is square or even circular if you can get one, and you can slide it down the axle and tap that bearing on. And of course the same goes for the collar. Tap the collar on until it is below the circlip. Once the circlip goes on, you know it's all the way home, and the same goes with the ABS ring there. You can warm up the ABS ring as well, get it to about 120 degrees in the oven or something like that, same as the bearing, and drop it on more easily. Or you can just tap it home with a hollow piece of pipe or post, whatever works. Use that as a bit of a slide hammer just to tap that ABS ring all the way down to the shoulder. Other than that, once you've got it all together, you can slide the whole assembly back into the axle housing and tighten up all your bolts against the back of that backing plate, put your brake back together, fit your wheel, and make sure it doesn't leak. Thank you very much for watching.